The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said he believes all countries will follow the US in recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of his country. But the foreign policy chief of the European Union, appearing with him in Brussels, said the EU wouldn't be changing its policy. Let's hear what both have been saying, starting with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
And it's time that the Palestinians recognize the Jewish state and also recognize the fact that it has a capital. It's called Jerusalem. I believe that even though we don't have an agreement yet, this is what will happen in the future. I believe that all or most of the European countries will move their embassies to Jerusalem, recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, and engage robustly with us for security, prosperity, and peace.
You know where the European Union stands. We believe that the only realistic solution to the conflict between Israel and Palestine is based on two states, with Jerusalem as the capital of both the State of Israel and the State of Palestine along the 67 line. This is our consolidated position, and we will continue to respect the international consensus on Jerusalem until the final status of the Holy City is resolved through direct negotiations between the parties, and we hope that the parties can engage in meaningful direct negotiations with the support of the international community.
Well, let's talk about this now with our Europe correspondent Gavin Lee, who's in Brussels. So, Gavin, Federica Mogherini delivering a clear message there to Benjamin Netanyahu vis-à-vis the position of Jerusalem. Away from those official statements, what have you been hearing about how he received that message?
Well, bear this in mind. It's the first time in 22 years that an Israeli leader has been visiting any of the EU institutions in Brussels. And I think that speaks of long and frosty relationships, partly because, the long-term position of the EU has been that there has to be a two-state solution. So there has to be a recognition that both Israel and Palestine have a shared capital of Jerusalem, going back decades of what happens to the east of Jerusalem, of the old city, which part of it was annexed by Israel. And that position hasn't changed. So you have a brief press conference this morning that looked pretty frosty as well at times, both of them standing next to each other, quite awkward because they had opposite views. We heard from Benjamin Netanyahu saying, as far as he sees it, what happened with Donald Trump was an acknowledgement of Jewish history, that there is to be recognition wider that there is a capital. And I sense it's the feelers going out now to see who else might join him by saying that in future other European countries might go the same way. Federica Mogherini said she's speaking on behalf of European countries and European leaders to say that this is not the way forward, and she strictly is concerned about that on a very serious level. I think just to rewind and note this as well. A few days ago, Benjamin Netanyahu said there were other EU countries that privately were thinking about moving their embassies to Jerusalem. Hungary, for example, blocked last week an EU communique, a message on behalf of all 28 criticising Donald Trump. And we had the Czech president as well saying he was happy with what Donald Trump had said and said that the EU were cowards. But that's not to say their official position at government level has changed. By what we've seen today, that hasn't.
I wonder what sense you have of the diplomacy that's going on then, because Vice President Mike Pence is due to visit the Middle East very shortly. Clearly, these negotiations have to be handled very delicately because no one wants violence to erupt in the region.
No, and we've seen some small skirmishes, haven't we, in not just in and around sort of Gaza, but Beirut as well yesterday, with rocks flying. We have both Mike Pence coming to the region, but also we have Mahmoud Abbas for the Palestinians coming to Brussels in a few weeks' time as well. So I think it's trying to balance this, trying to kickstart the two-state solution. But it has been given this, I think, almost galvanised the Israeli Prime Minister to hear these words of Donald Trump and to work out, is there anything in this apparently unified EU, which we've seen, haven't we? You and I have spoken about it, the deep fragmentation at levels when it comes to financing for Greece or the migration crisis as well. You can't help but wonder if the Israeli Prime Minister is sort of putting the feelers out to work out who else is on his side. I've just spoken to one of the EU Commission press officers, actually, quite interesting, whether an EU country can actually, for example, Hungary, could decide to self-recognise Jerusalem aside from the EU. Well, they can, we're told. They can actually say, no, we differ on this opinion. But today, from what we're hearing inside that room, all EU foreign ministers say, including Alan Duncan for the Brits, we agree.